Welcome back, everybody, to the Silver Bullets podcast. I'm Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnick.
Chip, I think that you and I have got to stop saying that this will be the toughest test Ohio State has faced, because it seems like every time we say that, or maybe we should continue to say that, because every time we say it, it doesn't end up being a very close game.
That's true. I never thought about that way. Like maybe we're actually purveyors of good tidings or good luck to Ohio State by thinking that it's going to be difficult. But you're right. It's been kind of a same old story. Different opponent every week. We're anticipating a tough game, and then Ohio State goes out and is completely dominant against a team that. I know we're going to be talking about Wisconsin, but fill in the blank. Any of the preceding games. It's been one of those kind of things where we really thought Ohio State would be tested, and 60 minutes later, so to speak, they're looking quite dominant.
Yeah, it's kind of been an amazing run, and you and I both thought it would be a tight game, and then of course on top of it, you get a little bit of weather, you get a bit of rain, a little bit of wind, not terribly windy, but certainly rainy, so wet ball conditions. And you think this could be a real slog, and kind of was for a quarter. And then in the second quarter, Ohio State didn't run off and hide like they normally do in the second quarter, but they did dominate the second quarter on the scoreboard. And then just they came out, had a bit of problems to start the second half. You thought maybe Wisconsin just is coming out with a little bit more urgency in the second half than Ohio State. But then Ohio State answered Wisconsin's score and never looked back. So from that point on, it was just like Ohio State got mad and said, all right, enough of you.
Yeah, maybe they decided to put off their second quarter explosion that we've seen over the preceding games. Maybe they decided to hold it back until the third quarter, because that's when they really broke the game wide open against Wisconsin.
Why not make the whole game out of the second quarter?
Why not? They might have to in future opponents. Maybe not the next two after the bye week, but certainly the last two look like they might be, dare I say it, challenging.
Well, I think probably because everyone on the team and all the coaches listen to our show religiously, they take offense to us saying this is going to be a big challenge, and they show us. They have to go out and show us that it's no challenge.
Whatever we have to do to provide positive motivation to the players and coaches, I'm happy to contribute.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's get into it. Ohio State wins, Chip, 38-7. Now, our score predictions were a little off. You had selected a 28-17 victory, and I had gone 35-20. So I kind of gave Wisconsin's offense a little more credit than I should have, and you gave Wisconsin's defense a little more credit than you should have, and so I would think I was closer to Wisconsin's score, or to Ohio State's score. You were closer to Wisconsin's score.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. So the game started a little bit how we thought it might. It was, again, defensive struggle. The first quarter there was no scoring. A lot of punting. The weather wasn't great. It didn't really seem that either team could get a foothold in the game. And that kind of happened throughout the first quarter and into the second quarter. And finally, Ohio State put together a drive of 12 plays, 41 yards, 4.5 minutes, and put up I was actually surprised that they attempted, in these conditions, a 49-yard field goal. But Blake Hobbill, fresh off that 55-yarder, said, no problem, coach, went out and drilled it.
It's very comforting to know that we saw it against Northwestern, and we also saw on Saturday against Wisconsin that Blake Hobbill, he is starting to become very dependable, very reliable, and in the coming weeks as the opponents get better and better, it's nice to know that Blake Hobbill is going to be able to rise to the occasion.
It is nice to see this, and it's what's I've been critical of Blake Hobbiel this year, and I think rightfully so. He's missed some not too difficult length kicks this year, but when you don't get a lot of opportunities, and you make those few opportunities you have, you look like you're on fire, and when you don't make the ones you have because there are so few, you look like you're terrible. And I think that probably the answer is somewhere in the middle. Blake Hobbiel is probably a pretty good kicker, but not like a senior year Mike Nugent.
That's fair. I think, it's something to be said that the Ohio State offense is usually so prolific that he's usually just called upon for extra points, that he's not really being called upon to deliver field goals as you might expect around the nation from other teams. So, like I said a moment ago, I think it's nice to see that over the past 2 games that he has really kind of shown that he can deliver if called upon.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Buckeye defense was fantastic throughout the first half, really throughout the whole game, but especially in the first half, it didn't really look like Wisconsin was getting a whole lot going. They hit a couple of wildcat plays that were decent and really didn't do a whole lot other than that. Jonathan Taylor never really got on track. He had a third down run that went for about 15 yards, I think, and then but really he was bottled up throughout the game. And Ohio State really put the clamps on Wisconsin's offense, and it just was a matter of time. You felt like you felt like one of the offenses would get going, and you obviously felt like Ohio State's was the more likely one to get going based on the skill position and all the speed and the big, obviously Wisconsin has a big offensive line just like Ohio State's, but we've seen this offensive line clicking this year. So it just seemed like at some point it's going to happen. And Ohio State finally broke through with a touchdown before the end of the first half to take a 10-0 lead, this time on a Chris Olave score from Justin Fields, and that was 27 yards, and he just kind of did that, out, kind of across the middle and then up the field again, and he was wide open. Great throw from Fields, and that was an 8-play, 85-yard drive in just a minute 54, and scoring the touchdown with 43 seconds left in the first half to take a 10-0 lead right before halftime.
And that's when I thought, all right, now Ohio State's cooking with gas, because to score that touchdown in the manner and fashion that they did with only 43 seconds left, and you're thinking, all right, they've got the 10-0 lead. They've been pretty successful at bottling up Jonathan Taylor and the other aspects of the Wisconsin offense, that you thought with Ohio State getting the ball to start off the second half, I thought this is where this game is going to start to get blown wide open.
Yeah, you felt like, it turned out to be true, but you felt like a 10-0 lead might be insurmountable the way Ohio State's defense was playing.
I think you're on to something, because, by the time the first half had concluded, I believe that they had already sacked Jack Cohn 4 times, by the end of the first half. So they were really, starting to dial in this rush. And as we said a moment ago, they were very effective in bottling up Jonathan Taylor.
It turns out that Chase Young is good.
Slightly, yeah. I am happy to see that at the conclusion of this game, the national pundits and the well-deserved accolades have been flowing consistently, because I think Tom Orr was onto something. One of the tweets that he had talking about back in 1996, Orlando Pace was denied the Heisman, and how egregious that was, simply because of the position that Pace played, he was overlooked. And it might be a similar type of a result this year with Chase Young, because he is the most dominant player in college football, and the Heisman Trophy is supposed to represent that. Never says anything about being the best quarterback or the best running back. It's supposed to be the best player. And so far, Chase Young, every game that he's played, every television analyst who has seen him play has been just gushing and marveling at the results on the field. And Ohio State fans certainly saw that. So did Wisconsin during the first half and throughout that game yesterday.
Yeah, you really. It's become a quarterback's trophy for the most part in recent years. You have to do something extraordinary as at any other position to even have consideration. Running backs. Sometimes a running back, if they're extraordinary, will get invited. Every once in a blue moon, they'll invite a defensive player. But I wonder how much of this is lip service. How much of this is when the rubber meets the road. Will these guys who have been saying Chase Young's the best player in college football should be a Heisman candidate or Heisman favorite, will they really throw their votes his way?
I'm optimistic, simply because I just think, everything not that I've seen every player in the country, but I'd certainly believe that Chase Young has been the best player that for at least I guess you could say more than half the season since Ohio State's 8-0. Mm-hmm. That he certainly has shown to be the most dominant player in all the games that Ohio State's played.
Yeah, I think it helped to have a national stage this week, but we'll see. If the new hotness from somewhere else starts to turn some heads. Certainly, Jalen Hurts was getting some play, and his team lost this weekend, so it maybe takes a little luster off there. But if Ohio State keeps doing what they've been doing to everybody, Chase Young will, I think, perhaps get an invitation to New York. But until some defensive player wins it, I don't believe that a defensive player can win it.
Like I said, can only hope.
So the second half began, and Ohio State had the football first, and you thought, okay, here's a chance to go and put the game away. But instead, the Buckeyes went 3 and out, and Justin Fields was sacked on third down, and it gave it made it time to punt. So Ohio State on 4th and 18, backed up to their own 17-yard line, had been struggling to get kicks off before the rush arrived, and finally Wisconsin's rush got home and got a partial block on this one, and it set Wisconsin up very nicely at the Ohio State 23-yard line, and then Ohio State, for 2 plays, did what they've been doing. The defense did what they were supposed to do, got 2 quick stops, and then third down, Jack Cohn threw a pass into really a lot of traffic. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh, what a perfect pass," but Wisconsin had 2 receivers chip in the same area, and that's not typically how plays are designed. And when the ball was in the air, I thought Jeff Okudah was coming off his man, was going to intercept that ball.
I agree with you. I remember thinking, well, one of these guys, as soon as you were tracking the ball in the air, and you might be onto something that it seemed like a very odd pass pattern for 2 receivers to be in the same general vicinity. But it certainly, just from the look of it, it certainly seemed that Okudah would have been able to break on the ball. I believe that Sean Wade was on the coverage of the touchdown that was given up that allowed Wisconsin to get on the board. But there might have been just some general befuddlement and confusion between Sean Wade and Jeffrey Okudah about who should have made a play on the ball, because it's certainly, I agree with you what you said a moment ago. I did not look at that as a terrific pass from Jack Cohn, as much as more of a miscommunication and misunderstanding among the Ohio State secondary on a play that at worst should have been knocked down. At best it absolutely could have been prevented.
Yeah, it looked to me like Okudah waited on the ball rather than going to high point it, and I think he could have made the play. I think the ball was thrown well in that it was thrown over Wade, but I don't think that was supposed to happen with 2 receivers that close to each other, because that generally spells trouble when you get that many defenders around the football while it's in the air. But Wisconsin was able to make it pay off and pulled within 10-7, and then as Joel Klatt said on the broadcast, now we're going to get a chance to see Justin Fields playing quarterback in a big game with a 1-score game in the second half. It's not something that we have seen because of Ohio State's big second quarters. And all Ohio State did was go 8 plays, 75 yards, and 234 to answer the touchdown drive, or the very short touchdown drive by Wisconsin with a long one of their own, and reassume command of the game.
Right, and I guess you could say that came at, I don't want to say at a heavy cost, but it did come with a cost, because when Justin Fields scored on the touchdown to make it 17-7 with about 9.5 minutes left to go in the third quarter, that's when all of a sudden you could feel the anxiety rise when it was being reported that Justin Fields was possibly hurt on the touchdown run and was in the injury tent, and all of a sudden psychologically that's when you could tell that everyone was tremendously concerned, and rightfully so. But as we all know, it turned out to be that Justin Fields was able to shrug off the discomfort and be able to go the rest of the way.
Yeah. It was a 10-yard run by Justin Fields. He kind of jumped into the end zone, was hit in the shoulder pad, and spun around and landed on the small of his back. And that, that looked painful. My back hurt just watching him land. And I think that it's understandable that he took that shot, and it was good that he was able to come back in the game. But that really showed the ability of Ohio State to go down the field, even on a very, very good defense. It was, there was Justin Fields' run in that drive. There was, pass to Chris Olave, a pass to, a J.K. Dobbins run for 28 yards. So there was, it was really nice to see Ohio State say, oh, well, now we got to start playing, and turn it on and start playing.
Yeah, it was nice to see that they did not allow the adverse weather conditions or the competitiveness of Wisconsin to throw them off their game, so to speak, and that they responded like the champions that we believe that they are.
And guys started catching the ball. There were a lot of drops early. There was a lot of made out of the receivers wearing gloves, and they say that the water on the gloves actually makes them more slippery. And there was a sequence there in early in the game where ball went through Chris Olave's hands and the ball went through KJ Hill's hands, and then on third down J.K. Dobbins made a really tough catch going up for the ball, and he had no gloves on, and I was like, well, there you go.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I think, as you said, it's a period of adjustment, getting used to the fact that it's if it's wet out there for you, it's wet out there for everybody, so you can't make that excuse of, the ball is slick. It's same thing for anyone else that's playing. So, I think it was just kind of a psychological thing of just getting used to the elements and just kind of, figuring out ways to overcome the slick conditions.
Yeah, and I don't think that the gloves ever came off the receivers. I think Olave kept his on and Hill kept his on the rest of the game. And I thought KJ had another drop later in the game it was a tough day, but there was some discussion that the receivers would, if they had trouble, take those gloves off, and they never did.
Yeah, they must have just. I can only guess that the coaches on the sidelines just say, just let's get them next time, kind of a thing, and not making too big of a deal out of it. That, like I said a moment ago, it was wet out there for everybody.
Mm-hmm. So Justin Fields made it 17-7. The Badgers then went 3 and out, and Ohio State took control with another touchdown drive. J.K. Dobbins running, Justin Fields running, J.K. Dobbins running, J.K. Dobbins running, a 9-yard touchdown run and a 34-yard run for J.K. And just an incredibly successful day for J.K. Dobbins, both catching and running the football. He was obviously taking the matchup against Jonathan Taylor personally. He was, he wants to prove he's the best back in America, and I think, obviously he doesn't have to face the Ohio State defense, but I think he showed that all of the Jonathan Taylor talk leading up to the game, maybe some more time should have been dedicated to J.K. Dobbins talk.
As we said a few moments ago, though, I think whatever it takes to be motivated in a positive fashion, I'll take it. If J.K. Dobbins felt slighted or overlooked by the media, or even possibly from within his own coaching staff, depending on what might have been said behind closed doors, The results spoke for themselves against Wisconsin. As you said, I mean, he ran extremely well. He was an effective receiver out of the backfield. He definitely showed that he is worthy of all the positive accolades he's been receiving this season.
He was a beast, and something about the number 2 on Saturday, because both sides of the ball, the number 2 excelled and was basically the best player on the field. So it was 24-7 after J.K. Dobbins ran it in from 9 yards out. And then, it just became obvious at that point. Wisconsin is not scoring 3 more times in this game.
No, they're not. And I think that's something that, for all of the positives that Wisconsin, they certainly, my respect for them is still strong. I'm still of the opinion that it's not going to be a shock to me if Ohio State sees that team. I know that they have a uphill climb, but I would not be surprised to see them get back into the West Division race, even with the games they have remaining against Iowa and Minnesota. But getting back to my point that I was going to make is that Wisconsin, that offense is phenomenal when everything is working well, when you're able to get Jonathan Taylor running for positive yardage and your offensive linemen are starting to wear down the opposing defensive linemen. It's something completely different when the opposing defense, like Ohio State, has effectively bottled up your best weapon, and your passing game is not nearly as robust as Ohio State's. I mean, that's kind of where Wisconsin was when they were down 24-7.
Indeed, and it was the next drive was maybe Wisconsin's best offensive drive of the game. They actually drove the ball from their own 30 down to inside Ohio State's 40-yard line on that ensuing drive, and we're starting to see some new things. We're starting to see Cohen keep the ball on on some read options, and they tried the Wildcat play again, but it looked like that Jeff Hafley had adjusted to that pretty well because it only went for 1 yard, but they hit a few short plays and eventually got to down into deep in Ohio State territory, got all the way down to the 32-yard line and had a 4th and 3. Then they false started, and the 4th and 8 did not go well for Wisconsin because Chase Young came in and got one of his 2 strip sacks on the game.
Yeah, I believe on that that first strip sack, I know we're going to get into when we talk in the fourth quarter. He not only obviously caused a fumble. I think that was his 3rd sack of the game in the third quarter. So I mean, you were referencing the power of the number 2. We were just giving proper credit to J.K. Dobbins. Chase Young was showcasing why he should be in the Heisman Trophy conversation with the performance, and the first of those strip sacks was just part of a tremendous all-around dominating performance.
Yeah, and it seemed like any time Wisconsin made a mistake against him, he made them pay for it. If they didn't double him, if somebody went the wrong way, it was always him making them pay, and it was just a very dominant. I mean, it was kind of like. You remember a few years back, the South Carolina Gamecocks had a defensive player that everybody remembers, the big hit against Michigan with the helmet popping off.
Yeah,
that's the kind of game that Chase Young was having. He didn't knock anybody's helmet off, but boy, he had a whale of a game.
Oh, absolutely. He and again, Wisconsin. It was just foolish. I mean, trying to sometimes block him with the tight end, or just with like a single offensive lineman. Either they completely underestimated Chase Young's abilities, or they overestimated their internal talent appraisal. But they were the victims of just some poor scouting on Chase Young.
Mm-hmm. Well, anytime that I can reference Jadeveon Clowney against Michigan, I'm a happy guy.
Certainly.
All right, so the third quarter ended with the score 24-7 and Ohio State holding on to the football, and the Buckeyes decided that 24 was not enough points and they went down on that ensuing drive and scored another touchdown. And it was J.K. Dobbins for 14 yards this time, and it made it 31-7. The Buckeyes continued to do what they were doing, and strip sack again. Chase Young. Pete Werner recovered at the 24, at the Ohio State 24. And it was that came off of really Wisconsin's, right after Wisconsin's biggest play of the game on a 35-yard pass to Quintez Cephas. So, even though Wisconsin was able to have a couple of successful drives in terms of yardage, Ohio State stiffened up and forced a turnover 2 times in a row. So then Ohio State went down, made it 38-7. This time on another pass to Chris Olave, this time only 4 yards. And that was it for the scoring. And then it was basically beat up on Wisconsin, make them punt, and then make them have to tackle Master Teague.
That just has to be what a painful chore, because Master Teague is quite the load. Mm-hmm. And we've had this conversation before, but it's true, is that you're not going to tell these guys to go in there and not play hard. I mean, they had the big lead, but Master Teague, to his credit, when he goes in there, he's playing as though like the game's on the line, and he certainly showed that with in limited play how effective he was as a runner for Ohio State.
I mean, you've been abused and mashed by that offensive line all day. You're discouraged because you're down, by 31 points. You're getting your tail kicked. It's raining. J.K. Dobbins has been running like crazy on you all day, and now you've got to tackle when you're exhausted. You have to tackle Master Teague.
It's a heavy burden to bear, but that's just life in Ohio Stadium on October 26th, 2019. That's the price of admission for Wisconsin.
Yeah. So 38-7, not a close game. In the end, the Buckeyes with 24 first downs to Wisconsin's 9. That vaunted rushing attack for Wisconsin did not get it done. It was pretty. The statistics were fairly lopsided, as you would expect. That there wasn't a lot of passing, and on a day like that, you wouldn't expect so. And Ohio State was so successful running the ball, they didn't really need to throw it as much. 167 passing yards for the Buckeyes, 108 for Wisconsin, and the rushing yards were 264 for the Buckeyes. I think Wisconsin was giving up about 50 a game.
Yes,
and Wisconsin did not rush for 100 yards as a team, only 83 yards rushing. So, great day for the Buckeyes. In fact, they held Wisconsin to, I think, about 50 or 60 fewer yards rushing than Northwestern got.
It was just an entirely dominant performance by Ohio State that certainly the coaching staff did their part in having these players well prepared and psychologically ready for a good opponent. I think Wisconsin, that's two losses in a row, one by surprise, one by complete domination. Where Wisconsin's season goes the rest of this year, because I know that Minnesota right now is in the driver's seat for the Big Ten West. It's up to Wisconsin if they can regroup and get back into what looks to be a pretty competitive divisional race.
Yeah, Minnesota right now they still have to play Penn State. They still have to play Wisconsin. I believe they still have to play Iowa.
Correct.
And, I don't know that Iowa can score a lot of points on this Wisconsin defense. So even though I picked Iowa to come out of the West, I think it will come down to the Minnesota-Wisconsin game.
That game, the Iowa-Wisconsin game, is actually going to be on November 9th. So I believe, and I might be mistaken, I believe the vast majority of the Big Ten is off this coming weekend. I know that Michigan and Maryland play, and I know that Northwestern and Indiana play, Nebraska and Purdue play, but I think the vast majority of the Big Ten, this is their second bye week. And when it comes to, you were just referencing, the Iowa-Wisconsin game for certain is on November 9th. The same thing is when Penn State plays at Minnesota, and PJ Fleck was openly campaigning for ESPN College Game Day to come out there since both teams are undefeated. But it's going to be interesting to see how this Big Ten West, how that divisional race shakes out, because I think Minnesota, they're 8-0. It is a feel-good story. I am more impressed with PJ Fleck than I certainly thought that I would be. I know that he's going to take them to a bowl, but I think November is going to be where you're going to be able to truly see, as it relates to Minnesota, how good this team is, because Penn State is obviously good, and I do think Wisconsin, even with the 2 losses, I think they can get back into this divisional race.
Yeah, I do too, and I think that it's because Minnesota has a tough schedule to run out. They have the 3 biggest games of their season still to come, so it leaves the door open a crack, and that's why I think it will come down to Minnesota against Wisconsin. The winner of that game, I think, goes to the Big Ten championship game out of the West. And so, you're right. We could see the Badgers again, and as you know, it's not easy to beat the same team twice in 1 year.
No, it's not. But by the same token, my belief would be that Wisconsin, if Ohio State were to see them again in the Big Ten championship, that would be a big psychological hurdle for that team to overcome, knowing how thoroughly dominated they were by Ohio State. And as I said a few moments ago, Wisconsin is kind of a one-trick pony with the Jonathan Taylor show. Once you have that kind of bottled up and figured out, they don't really have like a plan B, C, whatever to fall back on within the passing game. So if Ohio State does see Wisconsin again, I agree with you. I think it's not necessarily easy, but I also think Wisconsin would certainly be the decided underdog.
I think so too. I think part of what I think makes it difficult to beat the same team twice in a year is I do think that a team can get a little complacent, especially if they have crushed that team. I mean, I don't know how many times I've seen a team play another team twice in a year, and that second time there's way more on the line, and they come in thinking, well, we handled them before, all we got to do is handle our business. The other team comes out and just, with so much urgency and so much passion, and they're not going to go down without a fight mentality. And if you don't match that energy, you can get beaten, and you can even get run off the field. We've seen it before. We've seen, Ohio State lost the national championship because it couldn't beat UCLA a second time.
That's a good point. It is a good point. I have complete faith in the coaching staff and their ability to harness and focus these players, because I think that they're well dialed in with what they have in front of them and what they can possibly gain.
All right, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the statistical analysis of this game. Jonathan Taylor, Chip, was held to just 52 yards rushing on 20 carries. That's 2.6 yards per carry. Didn't break anything longer than a 14-yarder, and that was on a 3rd and 1. And that was, I think, one of those situations where you always worry that if a good back can break through a short yardage defense and there's nobody back there, they can take one of those to the house. We've seen, I can remember Beanie Wells a number of times busting, long touchdown runs on like 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1 kind of plays, and that was his biggest play of the game, and it was only 14 yards. So Jonathan Taylor was shut down completely, no touchdowns. I don't believe he's scored a touchdown against Ohio State in the 2 meetings that he's played the Buckeyes. On the other side of the field, J.K. Dobbins went 163 yards and 2 touchdowns on 20 carries. He averaged 8.1 yards a carry.
He came ready to play. I just think there had to be some things, either that he behind the scenes and or just what he possibly may have read or been told, by the national media about how this was kind of a showdown, that maybe he took it personally and wanted to show the country who the best back in the Big Ten was.
Master Teague ended up with 76 yards on 13 carries for a 5.8-yard average. Justin Fields, despite being sacked, I think 5 times, still ended up with 28 yards rushing. So he still ended up with positive yards even after being sacked that many times. So good for Justin Fields to to finish on the plus side of that ledger. Fields only 12 of 22 for 167 yards, but 2 touchdowns, no interceptions again. Jack Cohn was 10 of 17 for 108 and 1 touchdown, no interceptions. Both quarterbacks were sacked 5 times, but Cohn had the 2 fumbles and Fields did not. Fields' fumble came on a snap that was that he bobbled in the wet conditions. Receiving core, Chris Olave was your pick to click this week.
Yes, he was, and it was nice to see that he, in my estimation, Chris Olave, when Ohio State was, I don't want to say that they were struggling, but it was just kind of that initial the Ohio State offense. You referenced, some of the like the errant snaps from Josh Myers, that one of which contributed to Justin Fields fumbling and recovering, and the offense was just kind of sputtering at first. But I genuinely believe that Chris Olave was largely instrumental in kind of helping get the Ohio State offense out of a funk and get them going in a positive fashion.
Yeah, they were giving him some cushions, and he was taking advantage of that on third downs, and they were giving him, give him 8 yards when they needed 6, and that's an easy pitch and catch for a first down. It was nice to see Justin Fields recognize that and go after it and attack it. But Olave had 7 catches, 93 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also had a carry on a reverse, but only went for 1 yard. But I will say your pick to click certainly did click on Saturday. My pick to click was KJ Hill. He did not click. He was 1 catch, 11 yards, 2 drops, and really wasn't involved all that much. Olave did have the benefit of no Austin Mack to split some time with at that position, so he got some extra snaps. But I mean, KJ Hill has been largely absent the last couple weeks, but at least he kept his reception streak alive.
He did, and let's not write him off completely. Let's give some credit to the fact that it was not necessarily the most ideal of passing situations. And I mean, you referenced Justin Fields, his passing stats. It was not ideal to be throwing the ball, and KJ Hill he's never going. The one thing that KJ Hill is, I mean, he's a traditional possession receiver. Chris Olave, I think one of the things that is most underrated and probably just completely ignored by the opposition is he has tremendous speed. And I think a lot of people forget that or just maybe disregard it. I mean, I seem to recall that when he was in high school, I think he ran the 110.8. So he's got some serious speed to him. But when you look at him, physically, he's not the most physically imposing guy. And I'll be able to handle this guy up and down the field. And by the time you're thinking that, he's already blown by you for some of those big plays that you saw on Saturday.
Yeah, if he's even, he's leaving.
Right.
The only player to get more than 1 catch other than Olave was J.K. Dobbins with 3 catches for 58 yards. A really nice night catching the football out of the backfield for J.K. As I said, 163 yards rushing, 58 more through the air. J.K. Dobbins was just outstanding. We usually record this podcast on Monday night. We know who the champions are. We know who the offensive, defensive players of the game are. I'm going to go out on a limb and say J.K. Dobbins is offensive player of the game and potentially split it with Olave because the coaches do like to give co-MVPs.
I think that would be something. It would certainly be very fair.
Okay, I will say that my pick to click on defense, I'm kind of up in the air about it. I don't know if I would consider him to have clicked. I think he was solid, but I don't know if I'll give him a click. And that was, of course, I thought this was a tough Borland type game. He had 4 tackles, which was tied for the 4th most on the team with Malik Harrison, Jeff Okudah, and Jordan Fuller. So he was right up among the leaders. Didn't really flash anything amazing, but I think he was just part of that swarming defense that was just always around Jonathan Taylor. I thought that he had overall a pretty good night. Yeah,
I think he was solid. I mean, it was so he was he and everybody else were rightfully so overshadowed by the Chase Young performance. Mm-hmm. That I really don't think that it was anything that Tuff Borland or my selection of Malik Harrison, I don't think it was anything that they did poorly. It was just that Chase Young's performance was so dynamic and so dominant that it kind of overshadowed everyone else on Ohio State's defense.
Mm-hmm. And Harrison also had 4 tackles on the night, and no tackles for loss or anything that really flashed too much. So I think Harrison and Borland had, and even Pete Werner had very, very similar games. Although Pete Werner did have the advantage of the 2 fumble recoveries. So I don't know. Either they both clicked or neither clicked. So I think this one is a wash between you and me.
I think that's fair.
So Chase Young, obviously, we feel he will be Defensive Player of the Game when the coaches announce their awards for the week. But I will point out, and I did this in our Leaves and Peeves column this week. I want to talk about Damon Arnett because I thought Damon Arnett was outstanding in this game. He was asked to do a lot, not just in pass coverage, but he was asked to do a lot of defending on the edge on an island by himself, and he acquitted himself incredibly well. He led the team in tackles with 7 at tackle for loss. He didn't let anything really get by him.
Yeah, Damon Arnett is one of those players that he's just, I mean, I think you could probably make the same thing about Tuff Borland or Pete Werner, that a lot of Ohio State fans have just made up their minds in a perpetually negative fashion about Damon Arnett. And no matter what he does, he's never getting out of that psychological doghouse, so to speak. But I thought, considering the fact that he's playing with an injured hand, I mean, he played extremely well and was largely instrumental in that strong defensive performance that Ohio State fans saw against Wisconsin.
I'm just going on my admittedly imperfect memory here, but I can't remember Jack Cohn targeting a receiver that Damon Arnett was covering.
I don't believe. I think you might be onto something there.
So I just thought Arnett really flashed in the run game for me, and I thought he had a whale of a game considering he's playing one-handed. It would be so understandable if he was out there missing tackles, and he is not missing tackles. And he made at least 3 that I can recall where it was, if he didn't make it, it was going to be at least a 5-yard gain and could, potentially a chunk play, and he made the play.
Ohio State fans are going to miss him next year. That's not to predict bad things from next year's secondary. It's just that I think Damon Arnett has dramatically improved this year, and it will be interesting to see, if the upcoming Ohio State defensive backs play with the same kind of physical demeanor that Damon Arnett does.
Mm-hmm. I like to see Ohio State rotating the defensive linemen, even in a big game. They rotated them, kept people fresh, because Davon Hamilton and Tommy Togiai both played outstanding games. It almost didn't matter which one of them was on the field.
Yeah. Davon Hamilton, he had one of the sacks earlier. I think he was the beneficiary of a lot of the attention being paid to Chase Young, and I think he was credited with a sack. I think during the second quarter.
Yeah, so. He had one, fairly early in the proceedings. So, outstanding game for the Buckeyes defense, and I think we can say that was a pretty good butt kicking by the Buckeyes on Saturday against the Badgers. Oh,
absolutely! And who would have thought it?
I know it was. We did believe it was. I mean, I haven't said with Wisconsin coming off an embarrassing loss to Illinois like that we were going to get better than their best shot, and they took it and they pretty much ignored it and swatted them like flies.
Yeah, and it just, the biggest concern I had at the first bye week when I wrote about this for Athlon Sports was that complacency would be the biggest concern the Ohio State coaching staff would have. I think that still remains. And I also agree with something that Gerd wrote on the Ozone, and that is this bye week is coming at an ideal time, the second bye week, even though I certainly will miss watching Ohio State football the first weekend in November. There's something to be said about getting players with nagging injuries healthy. Justin Fields, you referenced it was a tough shot that he took, and he was able to power through it and continue playing. But a week off with no added bumps and bruises is certainly a welcome sight at this time of the year, especially as Ohio State heads into the crucial November stretch run.
Yeah, Chase Young, we can only speculate as the time of this recording if he'll get Defensive Player of the Week for Ohio State, but he did get National Defensive Player of the Week for he got the Walter Camp National Defensive Player of the Week award.
Yeah, I think it'd be something if the Big Ten completely ignored the national awards to give it to somebody else.
Yeah, it was very interesting to see the large groundswell of support for Chase Young for Heisman after this game from national writers. So many people from across the college football landscape that we follow on social media were talking about him, and it was pretty amazing. And Joel Klatt talked about him, and Gus Johnson, he said he gets a vote, he said, and he's thinking about giving his vote to Chase Young. So he's waffling already.
Well, he's waffling already, but let's not forget. I'm going to give Gus Johnson the benefit of the doubt here. Let's not forget that post game, the Fox pregame show when they were interviewing with Urban Meyer and Chase Young's parents, and just kind of enjoying all of the goodwill and the festivities of such a dominant win. At one point, I'm not sure if you saw or heard this, but the people on the crew were saying, Coach, can you get us back here? Because they enjoyed being in Ohio Stadium. So the next opportunity is November 9th when Ohio State plays against Maryland. Now, unfortunately, as we're recording this, we don't know what the kickoff time is, but chances are that could be the quote unquote like big noon game, just based on Ohio State being undefeated, because at 3:30 is the LSU Alabama game, so they might want to try to capitalize on Ohio State's popularity with having them at noon. Who's to say? And to take it a couple steps further, the games against Penn State and Michigan are certainly looming large. So who's to say that Gus Johnson won't have other opportunities to see Chase Young be dominant in person?
Exactly. So the Buckeyes stayed where they were in the polls, Chip, still number 3 in the AP and number 4 in the coaches poll. So, nobody was too impressed.
Nobody was, but I think that was just more that that's the unfortunate thing about the poll system is I think things kind of get established early, and then it's very difficult to break those mindsets. And I think November is where you're going to start to see things kind of start to adjust more and more in Ohio State's favor.
All right, with Chase having such a big game, Chip, I'm going to ask you this question. After the Sunday games and seeing that Nick Bosa had 3 sacks and an interception, Joey Bosa had 2 sacks, is Ohio State DEU?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are, and that is largely the work and terrific, not only the terrific recruiting but terrific development of Larry Johnson Sr. The all 3 players that you just referenced, all were fortunate to be coached and tutored by the best defensive line coach in the country. So yes, they are defensive DEU. They are defensive NU.
I don't want to jinx it or anything, but I think Nick Bosa is going to be Defensive Rookie of the Year in the NFL.
Oh, his performance so far is certainly warranting that.
He's been amazing. So it's good to see the Buckeyes continue to excel even after they leave Columbus. Even if we would have liked to have seen them for 4 years, they leave early. It's been an amazing run of success at defensive end for Ohio State. Now if we could just keep Jonathan Cooper healthy and get some of these other young guys, some more snaps, we might see the next beast. I think the next beast is going to be Zach Harrison, but we'll see.
Yeah, and kind of the point about Jonathan Cooper getting him healthy, that's where this bye week comes. I mean, it comes at a great time. And I know this is going to sound blatantly condescending, and I'm certainly not intending it to be that way, but if Jonathan Cooper is still kind of nursing some nagging injuries, if there's by any means possible to exclude him from the games versus Maryland and at Rutgers, and that means that he's at 100% health for the games against Penn State and at Michigan, I'm all in favor of that. I know that this is probably the most frustrating to Jonathan Cooper because this is his senior year and he wants to come out and show what he can do. But when it comes to the biggest games remaining on Ohio State's schedule, I would rather have Jonathan Cooper and all the players on the defensive front playing at best health. So if Ohio State, if they can go out and beat Maryland and Rutgers in the next couple weeks, playing their second, third string, and still be dominant, who cares?
Yeah, I think Thayer Munford is still dealing with an issue. Josh Alabi's been banged up. I mean, there's been quite a few injuries, and we haven't noticed them too much because the backups have stepped in and done an admirable job. So far so good. But it really would be nice to get healthy for this stretch run because, and as you mentioned, these guys are going to have to play a lot if they play at all against Maryland and Rutgers. But they're going to be needed for Penn State and Michigan. We'll talk a little bit about Michigan. Well, we'll talk about both of those teams here a little bit more in just a few minutes. But I think you hit the nail on the head. It's the bye week comes at a good time, and then you have two games where you could probably get by with playing. You could probably play DeJuan Jones the whole game against Maryland and Rutgers and be fine.
And that wouldn't be a bad thing when you look at. I guess I'm always the type that I'm always thinking of next year, not in the sense that I'm not enjoying the current year. What I'm trying to imply is I'm always thinking, why not develop the talent that is coming up through the ranks against your I guess you could say your lower ranked opponents, get them some much needed game time. So when it comes to DeJuan Jones, the simple fact is that playing him against Rutgers in the middle of November would probably be the best thing for him. I mean, if you're going to use a year of eligibility, why not use it against Rutgers, use it against Maryland on November 9th, at Rutgers November 16th. Make sure that you have a commanding lead and everything is well set. And and I realize that it sounds very, very cocky, but there's absolutely no reason to expose Justin Fields or J.K. Dobbins to additional hits. If you have a commanding lead midway through the second quarter, pull everyone. Who cares? And play. I don't care. Chris Chuganoff, Gunnar Hoke, Nicholas Petit-Frere, because when you look ahead to 2020, the offensive line, even though it's been playing extremely well, you've got coming back. I mean, you're going to have Josh Myers at center, and you'll have Wyatt Davis at right guard, and that's it. And so you need to. My point from a moment ago: why not get those players that could likely fill those roles, like DeJuan Jones, like Nicholas Petit-Frere, Gavin Cupp. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, the guys that I think make up the second and third string line. Mm-hmm. Get them in the game, and that way, when the 2020 spring drills begin, it's not necessarily, like you're starting with guys that are completely green and inexperienced.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Buckeyes, Chip, are off, as we've mentioned. They'll play Maryland on November 9th at home. They'll go to Rutgers on the 16th, and then they host Penn State on Senior Day, November 23rd, and then the big showdown in Ann Arbor on November 30th, in a game that's starting to pick up a little bit of luster, because let's start our trip around the Big Ten with a look at Michigan. They had a week in an out-of-conference game, a traditional game against Notre Dame, a game I thought I was pretty eager to see. because it seemed like Michigan figured some things out offensively in the second half against Penn State, and I wanted to see if that would translate. But all I found out really is that Notre Dame has an awful defense. And I don't want to take anything away from Michigan's offense, but Notre Dame looked soft. They played scared. They played, I don't know how many times I saw defensive players for Notre Dame try to avoid contact with the guys blocking them rather than try to take them on and shed them to get to a ball carrier. And I thought that Notre Dame didn't really show up for that game at all. Michigan wins at 45-14 and basically dominated a game in the rain where, you know, you would think that in the rain, all we got to do is stop the run. And Notre Dame didn't come close to stopping the run.
It was surprising. You would have thought that Notre Dame would have been wanting to play as well as they could, you know, because they were kind of hanging their hats on the fact that, hey, we played Georgia really tough, and that was a good loss and all this. And that went completely out the window against Michigan. Now, as I said earlier in the podcast, we were talking about Ohio State and Wisconsin, how if it's wet for Ohio State, it's wet for the opponent. Same thing, like watching Michigan and Notre Dame. I mean, it was coming down pretty hard. It didn't seem to bother the Wolverines, though. They seem to have figured out that, all right, when the weather is inclement, you should be running the ball, and it, as you said, Notre Dame just completely fizzled at even trying to stop the Michigan running game.
Yeah, I mean the holes were huge. Like I said, they played soft, but then again, the game plan seemed ridiculous for Notre Dame. I mean, they threw 29 passes in this game. Ian Book was terrible. He was 8 of 25, 1 touchdown, no interceptions. His QB rating was 12.6. 73 yards, 2.9 yard average, and he was, I mean, they hit him, they sacked him, but he was seeing ghosts out there. He was getting rid of the ball before he needed to. He was, like, even time, you know, the opportunities he had when he had time to throw, he was winging it downfield to nobody in particular. He was a mess, and he was just as much of a mess as the Notre Dame rush defense. Hassan Haskins ran for 149 yards. Zach Charbonnet had 74 more. Drew Wilson went for 45. And I mean, the winning quarterback in this game, Chip, went 6 for 12 for 100 yards.
Well, that's I give credit to Jim Harbaugh for, you know, sometimes simple can be, as the results shown, very effective. You know, running the ball and relying on a physical defense that, and then I guess, you know, when your opponent is going to be doing foolish things like, you know, Brian Kelly and Notre Dame's offensive staff decided to throw the ball even though they were not being effective. I mean, taking advantage of that. So Michigan now is bowl eligible. They've got a game this coming weekend against Maryland. They should win that. So, like you said, they're starting to look better than they certainly showed earlier in the season, but it might be a little too late.
Yeah, they're starting to figure out what they're good at doing, or at least they're stopping doing what they're bad at doing. When you look at only 12 pass attempts for Shea Patterson in the game, and Dylan McCaffrey made a return. He went 2 for 2, so he had a couple of throws as well. He threw for a touchdown. As Michigan just dominated this one 45-14. I'm not going to shed any tears over Brian Kelly team losing. And really Notre Dame set the tone for this game early because the idiots blocked a punt and then touched the ball downfield and gave Michigan a first down. Michigan ended up scoring on that drive. So instead of Notre Dame having the ball deep in Michigan territory and already being in scoring position, it was a huge swing as Michigan goes down the other end and scores, and then they built up a huge lead before Notre Dame, got in the end zone.
Yeah, I agree with you. I saw that play that you just referenced, and I think it just kind of set the tone for Notre Dame's incompetence that was shown to a national television audience all night.
That was not the only really dumb thing that I saw this week. There was also a blocked field goal that the defense picked up, and it was they thought it was the last play of the game, and they blocked the field goal. The game would have gone into overtime. It was a tie game. It was an attempt at a game-winning field goal. They blocked it. The player who scooped it up tried to lateral it, and ended up the other team fell on it and got, with 2 seconds left, got a chance to win the game again and did.
Yeah, that's where I point that at just poor coaching. I mean, that comes down to a lack of fundamentals and poor coaching. I know that the players, that they were thinking, okay, this is our opportunity to possibly win the game. But you have to coach that. That's the kind of thing where, all right, don't forget, after we block a field goal, after we block a punt, don't try to lateral it. Don't try like any of this stuff.
Yeah.
Like that. So that to me, that comes back to a fundamental flaw in coaching.
Yeah, and that was the Kansas-Texas Tech game, and Texas Tech blocked the field goal, and the kid must have thought, well, there's probably not going to be any time left after this play, so let's just go ahead and try to win it. But, I mean, once you're wrapped up, just go down and go into overtime and see what happens. There's no sense in doing that, because, I mean, we saw a game just a few weeks ago where a team was down and they tried to win it late. It was the Indiana-Michigan State game where they ended up fumbling in their own end zone and giving up a late garbage touchdown. But that didn't change the outcome of the game. But it's still, only bad things can happen in that situation. Very rarely are you going to see something good happen, and it certainly didn't happen good for Texas Tech as they lost. And it's no surprise that a Les Miles team was involved in such chaos.
Speaking of Indiana, because they beat Nebraska.
Bowl eligible.
And they are bowl eligible. And here was the thing that I was reading about this, that it just kind of caught my eye. It wasn't the fact that Indiana got their 6th win and that they're bowl eligible, because we knew that. I believe I read that this is the first time in 25 years that Indiana is bowl eligible before November. And it just kind of, that I may be mistaken, but when you're talking 25 years ago, that would be, you're talking 1994. It's that was back, let's face it, that was back when Indiana was still capable of giving Ohio State fits. Not that they haven't beaten Ohio State since 1988, but I'm just saying that was back when Indiana could still be a competitive thorn in Ohio State's side. So I'm happy for Tom Allen and the Indiana program that they have a bowl berth clinched, and now they can concentrate on, they have an upcoming game against Northwestern, so they can pad their resume, so to speak, and hopefully get to a more exotic bowl location than just someplace with a 6-win minimum threshold.
Yeah, and Tom Allen said that. He said, I believe his line was, let's play our way further south, or see how far south we can play our way to the nicer, warmer weather. This was a game, Indiana won it 38-31 at Nebraska. I don't know that anybody saw before the season started Indiana going into Nebraska and winning. Peyton Ramsey threw for 351 yards and 2 touchdowns. Nebraska's leading rusher was Wan'Dale Robinson, who ran for 83 yards. And Whop Philyor for Indiana, 14 receptions, 178 yards. He racked up a huge day against the Cornhuskers.
Yeah, when you think about Nebraska, I mean, I feel embarrassed about drinking the Kool-Aid from the off season, and Nebraska. I mean, they're looking at being bowl ineligible with a lot of tough games remaining. But I can't say enough positive things about Tom Allen. I mean, he's pretty nondescript in terms of he's not much of a rah-rah guy. He's pretty much what you see is what you get. But I'm certainly happy for Indiana and that program, because it's the kind of thing where you like to see the lesser lesser successful teams from the Big Ten East get their due, and it seems like Indiana's finally doing that.
Mm-hmm. And Ohio State has a win over a bowl team.
Yeah, there you go. Never thought of it that way.
Chip, the Rutgers Scarlet Knights get a victory. The Scarlet Knights, I believe, were actually underdogs to Liberty at home. Is that right?
That is correct. They were.
And Liberty loses this game not through a lack of offense. They lose 44-34 as the Scarlet Knights now have their second victory on the season. And, hey, good for Rutgers. You get to feel good about yourselves for a week.
And that will be it. Hopefully they savor. Hopefully they savor that. It's just been everything that could go wrong has gone wrong for Rutgers. I stand by what I said a few podcasts ago that the decision. I understand why the decision was made to fire Chris Ash, and I understand why they want to go in a different direction with somebody that has better ties to the New Jersey high school community that they feel can better recruit. That might lead them back to Greg Schiano. I understand all that, but I certainly stand by the fact that when they fired Chris Ash, that they certainly could not have known how badly the bottom would have fallen out. I mean, offensively, defensively, they have really, really struggled. I'm happy that they got their second win, but let's face it. I mean, it's going to be difficult for Ohio State to keep that, within 60 points, and that's with their backups.
Mm-hmm. Chip, break up the Illini because somebody put the fighting back into Illini, and the Illinois Fighting Illini have won back-to-back games. They have gotten to 4-4 with a 24-6 win over Purdue in a game that featured quarterbacks who threw for 71 yards on one side, 26 yards on the other side, although Purdue did have two quarterbacks play in the game. Aiden O'Connell went 7 of 13 for 65 yards, and Jack Plummer went 8 of 20 for 71 yards. None of the quarterbacks were covered in glory in this game. The Illini took a 17-0 lead into the break and then basically coasted from there. Reggie Corbin ran for a 20-yard touchdown. But honestly, Illinois' running game was the story. This one, 242 yards rushing. Purdue didn't really do anything on offense.
Yeah, we were just talking about Rutgers. They go to Illinois, the Fighting Illini, this coming week. Like I said, this is one of these games that, all right, man, you really have to be a diehard. It's going to be on BTN at 3:30 in the afternoon. But I think you had made the tweet about break up the Illini because the fighting is back during the game, and I responded that this kind of goes in reference to what we were just talking about Indiana, that the dream of a bowl game is within Illinois' purview. They with a win versus Rutgers and a win against Northwestern, that puts them at 6. Now, granted, it might not be exotic locales, but that's a move in the positive direction for Lovie Smith and his staff. So we'll see if Lovie Smith can keep the positive momentum going. Yeah,
Lovie Smith on the hot seat, but seems to have them head in the right direction. Back-to-back wins for Illinois, and probably back-to-back-to-back. I'm going to guess that Rutgers is not going to beat them. And that takes us to the Northwestern Wildcats, who are free-falling, Chip. They got shut out 20-0 at home against Iowa. Northwestern has one victory on the season, none in Big Ten play. The Wildcats are not going bowling this year.
No, they are not, and we referenced Indiana. That's their next opponent. I'm not sure of the kickoff time on November 2nd, but this is where you kind of get a feel for Tom Allen being able to keep his guys properly focused and motivated to improve on their bowl game destination, and by the same token, see what Pat Fitzgerald and his crew have in terms of pride and morale and trying to notch that first Big Ten win that has proven to be very elusive this season.
Mm-hmm. Iowa didn't really look great in the game. Nate Stanley was 12 of 26 for 179 yards. Tyler Goodson ran for 58 yards on 11 carries, but it wasn't a huge day. Really one of those yawner midday Big Ten games, but Iowa is in the hunt at 6-2 overall, 3-2 in the Big Ten. They are, they have this same Big Ten record as Wisconsin, so they are still among those chasing the Minnesota Golden Gophers, which beat the Maryland Terrapins 52-10 at home. Not a problem in those shiny. I like those shiny gold helmets that the Gophers have been wearing. What do you think of those?
I like them, and I caught a few moments of it, not extended, but I did watch some of Maryland and Minnesota, and I'm happy for Minnesota that they're 8-0. I believe they have a bye week this weekend. I know that Maryland is going to Michigan this coming weekend. I think Maryland is pretty much they pretty much mailed it in. They're kind of in they're a little bit better than Rutgers, but not by much. They're in the same general neighborhood in terms of preparing for 2020. But yeah, I getting back to what you were saying, I think Minnesota, the shiny helmets, PJ Fleck has that program going in the right direction, rowing the boat, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But let's see, as the opponents get better in November, if the boat doesn't start to spring a few leaks, so to speak.
The story of this one, Minnesota had about 7 different guys run the ball. They ran well. They ran for 321 yards. Not a real big day for Tanner Morgan. Didn't need to be. 12 of 21 for 138 yards is not huge, but it was enough with the running game. And Minnesota, the wheels have kind of fallen off for them. They are like a slightly better Rutgers at this point in the season, which is kind of surprising the way they started the year, but it is what it is. That brings us to one of the marquee games, I think, of the weekend, which was Penn State at Michigan State. And I think everybody kind of gave Michigan State a puncher's chance in this game, but that Spartan offense is just really bad. And Penn State, credit them for having a good defense, but you don't really even have to have a really good defense when you play Michigan State because their offense is terrible.
Yeah, and we talked about this before. It's going to be interesting to see for Michigan State what direction they take, because on one hand, you've got the all-time winningest coach in Mark D'Antonio, and on the other hand, you've got a coach who refuses to make changes that are blatantly necessary on the offensive side of the ball. I'm still in the camp that they're not going to fire him based on everything he has done for that program. But I think there must be some conversations about, hey, coach, how's your health? How about we kind of lessen your load and make you like the associate athletic director, and you could be the goodwill ambassador for football and all these things. I'm just speaking hypothetically, and try and get some new blood like Luke Fickell into that program, because it just seems as though they're kind of stuck in stagnant territory offensively.
Yeah, I just really wonder. I never really see anything. Haven't done any research, but because research is hard, Chip. I haven't really looked to see if there's if the Michigan State assistant coaches' salaries have been published anywhere, but I just have a feeling that they're cheaping out on their budget, and they won't let D'Antonio go get the guys he wants or spend money on coaches, so he's just going with what he's got because he's loyal to those guys. That's the sense I get, and I could be completely off, but it's just kind of one of those things where, I mean, you look at Mark D'Antonio and you think, okay, here's a guy who's, we know he's got a stubborn streak in him, but I mean, he's also this is his livelihood, and even if you're a loyal guy, you can do what you could do what Urban Meyer did. It's like, this coach isn't working out. Let me see if a small college would like him as a new head coach. And then you got this guy with elite Big Ten program experience taking over at a small university, and then that takes care of the problem. And then you don't have to feel bad about it because you got him a head coaching job.
Yeah, you might be on something there. I just know what is going to take place, and this is something that we haven't talked about because it's not necessarily the most pleasant of discussion points. But after the season, Mark D'Antonio is going to face a deposition about a former player, Austin Robertson, who was kicked out due to allegations of physically abusing women and I think like attempted rape, and he's going to have to take the stand because there's a lawsuit being brought. So that's why I'm saying it's going to be interesting to see how Michigan State handles this entire situation, because you've got the on the field challenges that you and I and others have noticed. Oh, by the way, the off the field stuff is looming as well. So how Michigan State chooses to handle that is going to bear watching. And I'm just kind of curious if that decision is made very quickly as soon as the calendar flips over to December about a retirement or an adjustment made within that coaching staff.
Well, that'll do it for our trip around the Big Ten this week, Chip. It was an interesting one. It always is. The calendar now will turn to November. We got our fall, kind of rainy, blustery Big Ten weekend out of the way. Now the weather will get a little crisper, a little cooler. There might be a little more wind, but probably not as much rain. And maybe toward the middle of the month we'll start seeing some snow games even. It's a great time of year, but I don't want to make anyone sad, but Chip, there's only 4 games left in the regular season for Ohio State. I told you not to blink, and you blinked, and the season's almost over.
Yeah, if you could figure out, this is the kind of thing where even though I was just being critical and condemning of it, saying that you have to be like a real diehard, before you know it, you're going to be, if you're anything like me, you're going to be pining for that Rutgers at Illinois game. To be shown on the Big Ten network, at least they're showing a replay of football kind of a thing, because it's going to be, we'll be in the off season sooner than we know. But yeah, savor these upcoming games. Even though Ohio State's not playing this coming weekend, I'm going to make a point of trying to watch Maryland against that team up north to get a feel for how well both of them look, because Ohio State has to play them both in the coming weeks. And I'll probably certainly want to watch that Georgia-Florida game at 3:30, and I'm just going to try and savor as much of it as I can before the regular season concludes.
Yeah, I might watch that mighty Northwestern Indiana game. I might watch the Nebraska-Purdue game. I don't know what I'm going to watch. It's college football. I'll watch something. I was up till 2 a.m. Saturday night watching Washington State, Oregon, a very entertaining game that came down to the last play of the game. So, me, I am a glutton for college football. I will watch whatever's on. I will flip around. If I don't get locked into one game, I'll just flip around. I mean, I tend to gravitate toward LSU games to watch Joe Burrow play, because the Joe Burrow show, Chip, is very entertaining.
Absolutely. And the next time the Joe Burrow show comes on is going to be it's the CBS game. It's a 3:30. It's going to be both teams undefeated. So you're going to see how good Joe Burrow is against Alabama, and we'll see if Tua has returned from his surgery. If he can't go, my suspicion is LSU can knock Alabama out of at least the SEC, if not the national title discussion.
Yeah, there's not even a lot of good SEC games next week. There's the big outdoor cocktail party, Georgia, Florida, next week at 3:30 from Jacksonville. There's always wackiness in the Pac-12 and the Big 12. There's a rivalry game, Kansas State, Kansas, and of course Kansas State with a big win over Tom Herman's Texas Longhorns. Oh, sorry, they beat Oklahoma. Tom's Longhorns also didn't do so well this week. They lost to TCU.
Yeah, I mean, so now that kind of eliminates potentially the Big 12. I should say, I want to emphasize the word potentially from being in the college football playoff discussion. From what I've read, the biggest beneficiaries of that now are the Pac-12, which was all but left for dead a few weeks ago. Now with Utah only having one loss and Oregon being able to pull off a miraculous win, it just kind of is. It's seeming that the Pac-12 can reassert themselves and possibly get back into the college football playoff discussions.
Yeah, I think that the thing is, Kansas State gave up some garbage time scores to Oklahoma, so it didn't have the same impact as like the Iowa or Purdue losses for Ohio State. But the other thing is that Baylor's still out there, and if they keep doing what they've been doing, they might be making their own case.
Yeah, from what I understand, watching the Ohio State-Wisconsin game, it was that Oklahoma-Kansas State game was going on at the same time. So I'm not the type to flip back and forth. Like, I just wanted to, even though Ohio State was being dominant, I wanted to see it come to its conclusion. So I agree with you. I think that some of those scores by Oklahoma at the end were, in garbage time, and it won't have the impact. But everything that I've read is that Baylor certainly has the ingredients to, if not necessarily duplicate, come very, very close to kind of following the game plan that was so successful for Kansas State that really hurt Oklahoma.
Yeah, and it's just kind of a double-edged sword for Oklahoma. They got a couple late scores to make that look better, and that if they get the onside kick, they could potentially go on and tie the game or win the game. So that looked good because they ended up not getting beaten by 4 scores, which they were down at one point. But on the other hand, their win over Texas doesn't look quite as good after Texas lost to TCU.
Yeah. And so that's kind of, it goes into quality wins and when did they happen and who did you beat and all these things that it would be nice if there was some well-established criteria that I think Urban Meyer makes some really good points about. It needs to be out there in terms of all these like what quote unquote get rid of the quote unquote look test. You need to have wins over these ranked teams or at this opponent or whatever it might be. So you might be right that the box score impact of Oklahoma losing to Kansas State may not be as dramatic, but as you said a moment ago, Baylor keeps winning. They might be able to make a legitimate case of their own and when they eventually do play Oklahoma.
Yeah, and the good thing for Ohio State is that with Penn State keeps climbing up. Penn State is going to, if Ohio State wins against Penn State, that's going to be a win over a very highly ranked team. So that's going to be very helpful. And then if Michigan keeps winning until that game, and if Ohio State wins that game, then that will be a very high quality win as well. So it's good for those teams to be ranked, providing Ohio State beats them. And the as far as the Big 12 is concerned, the date you want to remember is November 16th. That's when Oklahoma goes to Baylor.
Yeah, Ohio State basically has a glorified scrimmage on November 16th. So I would say that it'll be understandable if not everyone has their undivided attention in New Jersey. So I will certainly understand that.
Yeah. All right, Chip. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we wrap this up?
No, I mean, if anything, enjoy Halloween. Be safe. My children are at the age now where they, they get to go to Halloween parties because they're all high school age, and the whole trick or treating thing is kind of, Dad, I'm too old, kind of a thing. So what do I know? But in all seriousness, I hope for all of our listeners out there who have small children, be careful, be safe with your kids. Make sure that everyone has an enjoyable Halloween. Enjoy as much as you can the second bye week without Ohio State football. I know it's a tall task for a lot of people, but soak in the college football, as Michael said, because it is fleeting and it is almost going to be non-existent before you know it.
That's going to be the last month of the regular season for college football. So we didn't get any mailbag questions this week, Chip, but we will be back next week. So if you have any questions for Chip and myself, hit us up on Twitter with the hashtag SBPmailbag, and you can hit me up at Mike36fan, and you can hit Chip up at Chip Minnick, Minnich. Chip, where else can folks find you on the internet besides Twitter?
They can find me as a contributor to Athlon Sports, as well as on the Ozone as a contributor to Hayes and Cannon.
All right, I'm also the grumpy old Buckeye on Hayes and Cannon section of the Ozone.net. Chip and I are also on the front page when we do the staff predictions and also the leaves and peeves, so you can check out our work there. And you can also find me for my non-sports related stuff, although occasionally I will write about sports there, probably at michaellikestowrite.com. michaellikestowrite.com. So be sure to listen to all of the other Ozone Radio Network shows. Buckeye Weekly Podcast is doing some exciting things. They've got their Patreon now, Chip, and you can be a subscriber and get special ad-free episodes of that show now, and you can also get bonus episodes where they talk about college football at large, not just the Big Ten, not just Ohio State. And so they're doing some big things with the Buckeye Weekly. You can also catch the Buckeye Sloopcast on Mondays and Fridays, and of course us every Tuesday at and also, you know, why not throw us a review on iTunes. Go to iTunes, pull us up, and leave us a star rating and a review. And we could use that to get in front of more people and move up the rankings. So I think I've covered everything.
Absolutely.
All right, so we'll be back next week on an open date. We'll find some topics, we'll talk about them, and we will leave you the way we usually do by saying, "Go Bucks!"
Go Bucks!